Of course there are. There's lots of working groups and meetings. But I think that there is still a gap, and we'd have to look into who convenes this. But I think there's a real space for having a small, maybe quite high-level group that brings together the security, the political, the humanitarian, and the development, because I think we'd make a lot more progress, and there is scope. I know Andrew Nazio said this morning we're not going to get a fully unified approach, but I think there is scope for a much more unified approach than what we currently have. We're eating ourselves up in Sudan, and we look pathetic in front of the government, and of course they exploit it and they love it.
Could I add a comment? Very well. The problem is not on the ground. The problem are the instructions coming from all the capitals and from the headquarters. They are divided. And they create, anyway, I don't know about the present situation, but they create straitjackets for their own people within their embassies and within the agencies, so that they cannot easily cooperate because they have to listen to instructions. That was one of the reasons why I was pleading in favor of delegation. Because people on the ground of good intentions, being confronted with the same problem, find an opportunity to get a common solution, a common approach.
Yes, I would like to just quickly respond to that again, because I fully agree with you. That is my own analysis. Being on the field, I think that's absolutely right. This is part of the problem. I think also at the headquarters level, you've got a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about Sudan. But a lot of them are knowledgeable about the 2003, 2004, or the time when they were in Sudan. We cannot forget what happened then. We cannot deny that. We can't change that. But the problems in today that we're dealing with are different from the problems that we were dealing with at that time. So it's the people on the ground who I think are better placed to deal with today's problems in the most constructive way. And so I absolutely agree. We need support from these, from the headquarters and the capitals, but we do need more delegation to the ground. I agree.
A few issues. To go into the issue of the return and specific ethnic or tribal groups, I think this is an important point to watch, because the current return movement, you can't really call it a return movement. You've got people coming from Khartoum and other cities in the north, going back to, in many cases, to towns and cities where they don't originally come from. That creates tensions, that create also imbalances in terms of the different groups that originally were there and that are now being outnumbered by newcomers. So we need to watch this very, very carefully as a process. And this is where, in terms of what we can do, a much more sort of concerted effort towards livelihoods, and particularly urban livelihoods, needs to come in. And we talk about it a lot, but we are very bad at it, and we haven't really gotten anything off the ground in that regard. And it needs to come fairly quickly because the tensions are already there. We're seeing also, in terms of this ethnic group issue, we're seeing the first backflows, and I mentioned that. And that's quite worrying, because we do see that this is not only linked to absorptive capacity, but also the suspicion that there is towards these returning groups and where they were before and what they represent. So I think we need to, as a protection issue, look very carefully at this and engage very much with the government of South Sudan on this very issue. Then how EU and US can help UN to make the reforms that were mentioned. First of all, I think one of the things that we said before is that the reality will be there that you have a relief stream and a development or recovery stream at the same time. We have a structural relief operation in the Sudan that is going to be there, because displacement is going to continue for a significant period to come, especially in the interim period, as both sides are grappling towards their own identity. So that's one. Secondly, and I mentioned this also before, urbanization. I think donors should focus much more on urbanization in terms of having the right expertise on the ground, the right approach on this. and make sure that there is funding available for this, which is not an easy one, very cost-intensive one, but an important one nevertheless. The third point is to insist on the ownership issue and not fall into the OLS trap, or already many of us talk about the South as an NGO state. Okay, let's put our money and our resources where our mouth is, so let's engage with the government, however weak, however frustrating, and make sure that we invest in terms of capacity building and do this in the right way. And donors, I think, should very much focus help us focus on that in terms of the flow of resources that comes our way. I think there needs to be engagement not just at the federal level, but particularly at the decentralized level, the state level, where you have people who have much more accountability vis-à-vis their constituency. These governors, elected governors, are quite fired up, are quite motivated. They are a way, I think, to advance where we have failed on previous instances. Last point I wanted to make is the consistency in which donors, and particularly those two important donors, engage with the various counterparts. I think a discussion amongst donors, particularly those non-traditional donors like the Arab League and other quite important financial contributors, would be important, because otherwise we're going to be played against one another. Particularly in the north, we've seen that vis-à-vis Darfur, for instance. The Arab League is on a very different course than many of the other donors, and therefore the approaches that the government can go ahead on, like these model villages, are sort of contrary to what we are trying to do with many of the humanitarian actors. So there needs to be consistency in approach. There needs to be a discussion amongst donors that we are on a clear common line to engage with the government, that we can build common ground in a more coordinated manner. Let me leave it at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we all can express our appreciation to the group for giving us such a often profound look at the humanitarian perspective.